Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Debbie Brown, president of the Colorado Business Roundtable, and we're excited today to host a briefing of Colorado's ballot and a ballot issue preview. And we've done this for several years now with our partners at Common Sense Institute to review the ballot issues that are particularly important to the business community that have an economic impact. And then the second half of our call is going to feature a pro-con time with three of the top issues on Colorado's ballot. So we're excited to have you stick around for that, probably starting in about a half an hour, where we're featuring folks who care very deeply on both sides of the issue that we're going to cover. And just to give you a sneak preview on that, on the pro-con portion of today's call, we're going to cover ranked choice voting, Initiative 91, which is the big cat hunting ban, and then last will be Ordinance 309, which is Denver only, the slaughterhouse ban. So we have folks who are going to be on the call to give you some information on both sides of those ballot issues. But before I kick it off to Kara and Chris, I wanted to just let you know a little bit about Colorado Business Roundtable in case we're not on your radar and you're just tuning in to hear about some of these ballot issues. We're the state affiliate of the National Business Roundtable based in Washington, D.C., and so we look at issues with a state, federal, and sometimes global lens, and typically represent large employers, not just the private sector, but large employers from what we call the ABCG, which is academia, business, community, and government. But we're all mission aligned around the fact that business is a force for good, and that we need to, as a coalition, come together around solutions that make the business environment here, the employer environment here in Colorado, as best as it can be. So that all of us can prosper, certainly not just the business, but everything that business provides in our community, including jobs, philanthropic efforts, tax base, and so much more. So we come at these issues with that lens around business as a force for good. And so we try to focus some of the conversation today about the business impact, the economic impact. And that's why, again, we've partnered with Chris Brown for many years to help bring some substantive conversation around these ballot issues. So welcome. We're excited that you're all here to join with us. If you have any specific questions or information that you want shared with the group, we're asking that you share that with the host of today's call. Those will be buffered through the host so that we make sure we only post productive links of information sharing, and we're excited to have that available as well. We won't be taking Q&A, but we are happy to provide additional information if you'd like at the end of the call to make sure that you have the links and the information that you want as you're considering how you're going to vote this year on Colorado's ballot. So with that, again, welcome on behalf of Colorado Business Roundtable. I want to introduce our first two guests who are going to be presenting to you a briefing for the first part of the call. We've got Kara Van Stralen. She's the founder of Vista Strategies and provides consultation to Colorado Business Roundtable on these issues. And also want to introduce Chris Brown, Vice President of Policy and Research for Common Sense Institute. So to kick us off, I'm going to throw it to you, Kara. Thanks for taking the first part of the call.
Thanks, Debbie, for that great introduction. I'm super grateful to be a part of this and to continue helping to support you in showing that business is a force for good. And I think a big part of that is civic engagement. So what better topic than the election that's coming up here around the corner? Erin, do you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. So just some important dates here as we get into these issues. Election Day this year is going to be Tuesday, November 5th. And then if you or anyone in your sphere is not registered, you can do that by mail or online as long as you do it by October 28th. And then you can continue to register in person up through Election Day, November 5th. So I'll touch on a couple of ballot initiatives before handing it over to Chris if we want to go to the next slide. And as you may know, ballot initiatives they get on our ballot in one of two ways. It can either be citizen-led through a signature process, or they can be referred through the General Assembly. This year, I think about half of our ballot initiatives came from the General Assembly and half came through that citizen-led initiative. So I'll start with Amendment I, which is a constitutional amendment that would make first-degree murder suspects ineligible for bail as long as prosecutors can show that they have a strong enough case. So this initiative aims to address unintended consequences from repealing the death penalty back in 2020. The state constitution says that only people charged with capital offenses can be denied bail. So this would address that issue, and it had wide support from both the House and the Senate, and both parties. And because it is a constitutional amendment, it would require over 55% of the vote to pass. Next, I have Initiative 112. So that has to do with parole eligibility for people convicted of violent crimes. This was brought forward by a group that many of us are familiar with called Advance Colorado, that focuses on increasing government transparency and strengthening the economy. So under this initiative, people convicted of certain violent offenses would have to serve at least 85% of their time before becoming eligible for parole. And that contrasts with current law, which allows inmates to apply for discretionary parole after they've served 3/4 of their sentence, or even sooner if they're being rewarded for good behavior during their time in prison. The list of covered crimes under this initiative includes murder, sexual assault, aggravated robbery, and serious cases of assault, arson, and burglary. The initiative would also require anyone convicted of any of the listed offenses 3 or more times to serve out their full sentence without being eligible for early release. Next, I'll touch on Proposition JJ and Initiative 310. So Proposition JJ is a legislative proposal that also had bipartisan support, and it would allow the state of Colorado to keep and spend additional tax revenue collected from sports betting. 5 years ago, voters approved on the ballot sports betting and allowed the state to keep up to $29 million in tax revenue each year. However, economists now believe that this sports betting will bring in significantly more than that. And under our Taxpayer Bill of Rights, lovingly known as TABOR, we have to bring that to the ballot if we want to allow the state to keep the excess revenue. So we've seen similar initiatives to this with regard to tobacco taxes and cannabis taxes in the past. And if this ballot measure passes, the additional revenue will be put towards water conservation and protection efforts here in the state. And lastly, Initiative 310, I won't talk too much about it because, as Debbie mentioned, we have some experts coming in later to really dive deep on it. But it would change the way that our primaries are voted on and our general elections here in Colorado. So instead of having each party pick its own candidate through the primary process, the traditional primary process, all primary candidates would appear on the ballot, and the top 4 contenders would advance to the general election. From there, voters would get a ballot listing those top 4 candidates. And instead of selecting just one, they would rank their choice in voting, which would determine the winner. So proponents, including Colorado Voters First, have touted that ranked choice voting would ensure elected candidates receive more than 50% of the votes in the general election. So it would be more representative of the constituents that they represent. And they've also discussed that the likely added benefit of this would be having more moderate or temperate leaders rising to the top, which many believe would be beneficial during the divisiveness of today's political climate. Opponents such as Voter Rights Colorado, which is a group that's supported by progressive organizations in the state, have said that this process is really needlessly complicated and complex and may deter voters from participating. So we'll look forward to learning even more about that later today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Brown, who Debbie has already mentioned is just a brilliant and balanced policy leader, thought leader, and we're super lucky to get to work with him. So Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kara. Thank you so much. And I'm pulling up slides now, making the transition. Hopefully those are up. Kara's nod ahead, thumbs up, make sure we're working. Great. Thank you so much. And a pleasure to always join this group and be able to share our work. As listening to Kara, there's so much depth to these issues. I'd encourage anyone that wants to take a deeper dive. Certainly, you will be getting your ballot guides and the official, ballot analysis from our legislative council staff at the state here in the coming, month or so. But please visit commonsenseinstituteco.org. You can visit our ballot issues where we have reports on each of these issues, which dives a little bit deeper. I'll try to give a rapid fire here. As Kara mentioned, this year, well, let me get into it, and then I'll maybe summarize a little bit more. But thank you, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share. For those of you, again, not familiar with CSI, we are a 501c3 nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization that focuses on producing, content and information to help inform voters, elected officials, and business leaders on key issues facing our state economy. A lot of the work I'll be talking about today is supported by a very diverse range of fellows, policy fellows that lead in different areas of work, whether that's in healthcare, whether it's in child welfare, economic mobility, energy, education, housing. So some of the work that you see that I'll be talking about today, and if you dig into those reports, it's actually supported by CSI policy fellows on top of our great research staff. Before I get into what's on the ballot, I wanted to take a quick note and just mention what is not on the ballot, given this was sort of an issue that was certainly top of mind for everyone heading into 2024 ballot season, property taxes. And probably many of you have been following this debate, and to some degree, and I think it largely seems like the policy discussions that really launched after 2020, following the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment, seem to have, we haven't put any wagers on this here in our office, but been settled. There was an August special session that reached a compromise on property taxes going forward. And as a result, two measures which had been filed, and the Secretary of State had indicated actually collect enough signatures. 50 had already qualified. Initiative 108 had collected sufficient signatures. The proponents of those removed those from the ballot, submitted letters, and the governor signed the bill coming out of the special session related to property taxes. Just as a sort of reminder, this is on the backdrop of the largest property tax increase in the last 50 years in Colorado, about a $2.4 billion property tax increase, about 19% growth this last year. That the compromise and the changes will impact going forward, does not change the bills that taxpayers saw this year. So just a couple of highlights, and I'd be happy to dive in a little bit deeper, but the negotiations, there was a couple of key highlights that came out of it. Essentially, residential rates will be lower than where they would have been. So under prior law, residential assessment rates, the statewide tax rate applied to property values, would have gone back up much higher. It will now come down to a larger degree based upon this compromise, but still be slightly higher than the rates Coloradans are paying today. The commercial rates, most of the non-residential, primarily the commercial and several other categories of commercial rates, will be lower, coming down from 29 down to 25% in the long run. It also established a different system for assessing property tax revenue for schools versus local governments. And some of the differences there in how rates will be calculated and the caps that will be applied to growth for each of those going forward is what's sort of leading to this difference in rates Coloradans will be facing. Schools will have higher tax rates than local districts. So a lot has changed, but for the purpose of evaluating the ballot, those measures will no longer appear before voters. So let's get into some of the issues that we studied here at CSI. And, as Kara mentioned, there are 14 statewide ballot measures voters will face, 7 constitutional measures, and 7 statutory measures. We only analyzed just a few of them that really more directly impact the key issues and key areas we study on the economics and around education and our workforce. So let's jump into it. Amendment 80, this is a constitutional amendment that would put provisions and definitions around school choice into the state constitution. It reads directly, "The people of the state of Colorado hereby find and declare that all children have the right to equal opportunity to access a quality education, that parents have the right to direct education of their children." And so that those words be placed in the Constitution. The ultimate impact of this will play out in both courts and in both future legislation and at the local level as authorization of charters and other choice mechanisms get discussed. So there's no direct change to our state funding formula or to directing of dollars under this amendment. See, analyzed several categories of outcomes related to our current charter schools. Charter schools were authorized under the Charter School Act in 1993. Since then, they've grown every year. 50% of students students in charters currently are students of color, and in many areas, in terms of test scores and outcomes, they outperform non-charter schools. One piece that we found to be very compelling, we've been analyzing the post-secondary attainment outcomes of schools, looking at a range of again, different types of schools and different regions of the state. But we found that students at charter schools obtained post-secondary credentials about 42% compared to non-charter schools about 34% in the most recent data, which gives about a 6-year window for obtaining that. So there's a report that details quite a bit more on some of those different outcomes, but this is ultimately sort of a broad question that will have an impact based upon how the legislature and local governments interpret this going forward. Let's move on to Proposition 130. This would be a measure that would require an appropriation of about $350 million from the state's general fund, directed towards providing grants to local governments for the purpose of supporting the training, recruitment, retention of police officers, and some additional dollars related to mental health. So this is a substantial amount of funds coming from the state that now local governments would be eligible to submit grant requests to and potentially obtain, dollars to support. It also has a recurring and ongoing $1 million compensation for police officers killed on the job and supporting their families. So there is a sustained funding piece, but the primary portion of this is a $350 million state grant to local governments. And again, it's one time, likely be granted over multiple years, but it's not an annual recurring amount. So, some of the interesting, we've done a lot of work here at CSI. If you're interested, dig in some of the local differences in both crime and crime rates and law enforcement. But, Colorado has seen a relatively significant increase relative to other states in terms of overall crimes, specifically property crimes. Over the last decade or so, crime rate rose more than 25%. And Colorado does consistently lag behind the national average for police officers per capita. So just some high-level information, again, we provide in some of our reports to give some context, but again, the impact will be dependent upon how local governments apply for these dollars. Proposition 127 is a statewide measure, again, would be a statutory change proposing to ban the hunting of big cats, specifically mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx. There's current language around provisions around mountain lion hunting and outlawing trophy hunting currently, but this would put more of that directly in statute. Again, as Kara said, this is one I'm very interested in hearing some of the debate coming up here further on. As we were analyzing it, as we were taking, looking across the state's analysis, some of the existing research out there, we saw the state, and will be appear in your ballot guide, estimated a direct impact of about $410,000 directly related to licenses related to mountain lion hunting. We estimated a dynamic impact between about 3.6 and 5.8 million after accounting for some of the broader impacts mountain lions would have on ungulate populations and the impacts across hunting more broadly. Okay, that brings us to some of the local measures that we studied and included. So Denver, we have 2 measures or 3 measures that we put out some work on specific to Denver. In the coming weeks, we may also have some additional work specific to some deep roosting measures in certain counties. We know that Jefferson County and Arapahoe County will be putting deep roosting measures before voters. We have not put out any research on that yet, but in the coming weeks, we may, as a couple other counties are considering that and could put those before voters. But in Denver, we know that there is a slaughterhouse ban being proposed. Again, would make the slaughtering of animals illegal within city limits. Denver is the one slaughterhouse in Denver processes, I've heard in the range of 10 to 15% of all lamb across the country. And if that were to shut down, estimates from CSU, research that CSU put the total economic impact at about $760 million. As we analyze that, about 65% of those impacts would be outside of the food processing sector. So in services and in industries supporting that business. Another measure that Denver will face is a fur ban. So this bans the both buying, purchasing, and selling of fur products within the city of Denver. So both, technically, and as the language reads, would make it illegal to purchase fur, even if outside, online and brought into the city. The interesting piece to this measure is the extent to which it goes. There are a lot of products you might associated with fur products. Say mink, the mink coat comes to mind. But the interesting thing is we dug into some of the potential ramifications of this issue is the extent to which other sectors that include fur-based product, animal-based products could likely, and it's unclear, but would likely be impacted by this type of provision as well. Specifically, within the fishing industry, a lot of the products in fly fishing include animal-based products and fur-based products. And so the selling of those, the flies would fall under this, sort of making that illegal. A lot of Western wear, including cowboy hats, potentially falls under this measure as well. So this one is an interesting one to watch, but will appear before Denver voters. There are 2 sales tax measures going before Denver voters. One is a tax proposing to raise the city's existing sales tax by an additional 0.5% to raise about $100 million in funding dedicated to affordable housing. And so the question again before voters is this another measure similar to what we've seen in the past? Voters have recently authorized a range of sales tax measures. This would increase the state's total sales tax above 9.3% when you include the base state tax, local tax, along with some of the recent increases in taxes that the city has approved recently, the city voters have approved recently. And again, where these dollars would go would both be a combination of rent support and unit creation. for those interested in this topic, I'd encourage you to maybe take a look at some of other work we just put out on housing with our housing fellow, Peter Lafari, examining the city's inclusionary housing ordinance, which was intended to prioritize and require new development of large multi-unit residential to include a portion designated as affordable. The unintended consequence of that has been a significant decrease in the overall number of permits as the capital has gone elsewhere. And so there's a big question I think voters should be asking, which is more is being asked on the taxpayers in terms of subsidy, when overall we're seeing a decline in the units that are needed in order to close the existing supply gap and meet projected demand, which is maintaining an affordability crunch for the city. And finally, Denver Health, the city's Trauma One hospital, is proposing to have a dedicated 0.34% sales and use tax, raising about $75 million. The Denver Health costs have doubled in the last couple of years, while the direct appropriation to the city has remained unchanged at about $31 million, as their costs related to migrant healthcare and larger growing unsheltered population has grown. This is a way of stabilizing the hospital. They're seeing growth in uncompensated care. And again, this is their proposal to help stabilize their funding. I believe that is it, Debbie. So I will kick it back to you unless you have any specific thoughts or questions. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. If folks have questions for Chris specifically or for Kara, feel free to send them to the host, and we'll try to get those questions answered or some resources put in the chat during the next portion of our conversation today. So happy to kind of get those questions answered for you. So the next portion is we've asked representatives from the different campaigns to come and share with you for 5 minutes each, top level information about what they're either for or against on 3 of the issues we felt like were the most pressing for Coloradans this election cycle. So first, we want to talk about ranked choice voting, and we invited proponents of that. We've got Dick Wadhams and Landon Mascarenhas to talk first for 5 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to the other side to give the con. So I'll start the timer, and Dick, I see you on the call. How about I turn it over to you?
You bet, and Landon will follow me. Thank you, Debbie, for having us today. I'm a former Colorado Republican state chairman, and I'm part of a bipartisan group of people who have joined together to pass Proposition 131. We were assigned the proposition number earlier this week. The open primary ranked choice voting proposal is something that I did not come to support lightly. I've always been a proponent of our political process in Colorado, but I've noticed something in the last several years, that the Colorado process has moved the parties to their extremes. The Colorado electorate has changed dramatically in the last 14 years. 800,000 people have moved here. The political parties used to be evenly divided between the third Republican, third Democrat, third unaffiliated, and it is now nearly 50% unaffiliated, 27% Democratic, and 23% Republican. What is the significance of that? These new voters, unaffiliated voters, are moving away from the political parties as they see the parties start to cater more to their extreme wings. And that's why I decided to support Proposition 131, because I think it will open up the process. Voters should be able to vote in any election at any time. Republican and Democratic primaries, which are funded by the taxpayers, should not be closed to any voters, and that's why we have one open primary with ranked choice voting. And to go through some of the details of the proposal, I'll throw it to Landon.
Thanks, Dick. I appreciate everybody. Thank you first off for all that you do for hosting us to build a better Colorado and to create economic development all over the entire state. My name is Landon Mascarenhas, and Dick, he has some really great background in Republican Party politics. I've been a Democrat my whole life, but my dad voted for Ross Perot and my mom voted for Bill Clinton, and I think this idea of respecting the ideological diversity of our state, our communities, and of what makes our democracy strong really appeals to me. I work in education, economic development. I'm the current chair of our state community college board appointed by Governor Polis. Really the whole point here is we want to move from the gold standard to the platinum standard. We have an incredible election system in Colorado. Our mail-in ballot system is safe and convenient. We have same-day registration, but unfortunately, too many people are closed out from that process, and open primaries, moving to a nonpartisan primary, creates a condition for more people to participate. While when I'm done here, I'll drop in some notes and some links to research from the Alaska model, which is very similar to what we're talking about here, where voter participation went up. More people were a part of the process. People were engaged, and it allowed for folks across ideological backgrounds to come together and for the ultimate winner not to be supported by just a plurality, but by a majority of voters. And that's really what we're talking about here, is that we want it so that everyone has the ability to vote in any election for any candidate they want, which would we move to that nonpartisan primary ballot and that ranked choice Final Four runoff. And the final victor, we know in a ranked choice system, which is really inspiring, would actually be able to not only change the way campaigns are run, because if Dick and I are running against each other, the traditional way of campaigning is that I'm going to try to attack Dick and I'm trying to actually raise up his negatives. And that's what we see all over this country. But with ranked choice voting, that transforms, because now I want Dick's supporters to rank me number 2. People will tell you that that's confusing, but we tell you that voters across this country know how to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and to be able to actually create coalitions and connections for the purposes of making that happen. So right now, taxpayers fund partisan primaries, which are actually limited to their respective groups, and independents got to pick one side or the other. And actually, this creates a lot of challenges in closing off this system. We know the data is very clear nationally that voters are really concerned about the health of our democracy, and we have lots of data to suggest that. And there are campaigns all over the country. We're not alone in Colorado. People are moving toward this reform in many states, which is so exciting, which means it's one of the largest amounts of pro-democracy reform measures on the ballot in American history. And here it's so inspiring to work on a campaign alongside independents, Republicans, and Democrats. In Idaho, Mormon Women for Ethical Government have organized to put open primaries and ranked choice voting on the ballot. And Americans across political backgrounds are coming together to make this happen. This would apply to all statewide campaigns and candidates, and the top 4 would advance. And then in that final stage, there would be a ranked choice runoff. And just to kind of close on this point here, because I want to be respectful of time, but why do we need this in Colorado? The reality is clear. The primary system that we have in Colorado means that in too many places, the general election is not a competitive race. 54 of 65 state house districts were uncompetitive in the general election.
And
our
Landon,
state
just to wrap you up, we're past 5 minutes. Go ahead and give your
sounds
closing
good. 30,
sentence.
35 of 31 of the 35 didn't have it as well. So open primaries, ranked choice creates options for all Coloradans. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Landon and Dick. If you have anything that you want to share with the group, feel free to email it over. We'll make sure it gets out, or we'll put it in the chat as well. Now I want to turn it over to Ellen Dunn with Voter Rights Colorado, and Ellen is against the measure. Ellen, take it away. Ellen, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, there you are. Great.
Thanks for the opportunity to join and kind of give a fuller picture of what we're looking at beyond just advertisements. And I want to say hi to my friend Dick Wadhams, from who I feel like I've known forever. I think we agree that all of our politics is crazy divisive. I also want to say to this group that I think it's good business for our community to have confidence in fair, safe, accurate elections. I don't think 131 is the answer. It's not voter friendly. It's confusing. It's expensive. It brings more undisclosed money into politics. It comes at the wrong time when election deniers are vocal in their distrust of the system. And most of all, experience and research in other states show us it's built on false promises. A thread that runs through the independent research is that the system is confusing to voters. And this particular model is even more confusing because only half of candidates in Colorado are covered under this proposal: US Senate and House, governor and statewide races, and the legislative races. US president, local elections, so everything from district attorney, county, city, other local elections would be held under current laws. That means every voter is going to get 2 ballots for both the primary and the general, and we're going to vote in 2 different ways. Other states show that the confusion decreases turnout rather than increases it, and particularly in historically underrepresented communities. Even the county clerks who run our elections are saying this is a recipe for disaster. Ranked choice voting is particularly confusing to voters because voters are asked to rank 4 per race in the general election in case of an automatic runoff. Research shows that up to 1/3 of voters don't rank their votes, and that means they lose their votes in subsequent runoff rounds. That translates into electing officials on the basis of confusion and without a majority. In Colorado, our research for Voter Rights Colorado indicates that there's significant opposition to this proposal on both sides of the partisan divide because voters believes it's going to give the advantage to the other side. I vote in Denver, but I also work as an election judge in Chaffee County, where the clerk has a hard time recruiting help for the elections. And I can tell you that the miscommunications with voters, dealing with them on the ground in elections, spawn conspiracy theories where they don't understand. It also spawns threats to election workers. This system would only make that worse. Pam Anderson, who is the former head of the Clerks Association, ran for Secretary of State, former Jeffco clerk, one of the most knowledgeable elections officials in Colorado, told me, and she said I could quote her on this, watching an RCV runoff is like watching a carnival shell game. And it will not deliver on its promises. Last year, the University of Minnesota studied RCV races where they've been adopted, and the conclusion is that there is little to no evidence that it reduces partisanship, that it delivers any more diverse or moderate candidates, or has any impact on negative campaigning. So let's briefly talk money. This proposal will cost state and local taxpayers $21 million in the first 2 to 3 years. And whether intentional or not, 131 does not take into account campaign finance restrictions that handicap candidates without big money. When you have 6 to 8 candidates in a primary and 4 in the general, $1,100 a person doesn't go far. So it forces more money to come from undisclosed sources and special interests. Finally, I will say, I think we've already gotten a preview of what 131 is going to look like. Last June, 3 days before the primary, Kent Thiry, the power and money behind this measure, he also is interested in those other states, dumped $1.1 million into ads for a handful of chosen candidates. I happen to live in one of the districts that Thiry targeted. I know some of the candidates were resentful at the appearance that they had been bought by Thiry, who has his own agenda. And as a voter of the district, it's frustrating to watch that much money come into my House district instead of letting the voters decide our own House representative. If Kent Thiry wants to let Colorado vote, we should say no to Prop 131. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate the time, and we will move to the next question. I would like to caution our speakers, singling out one person might not be the most productive. I think there's still fair and free ways that people can make their voices heard through their pocketbooks as well. So that might be a good guideline for us, but appreciate the time. We're going to move to the next issue, which is Initiative 91. The title is Prohibit Bobcat, Lynx, and Mountain Lion Hunting. Most people call it the Big Hunting Ban, and we're going to start, as we did with the other issue, on pro first and then con. So on the pro side is Dr. Jim Keene. Welcome to the call, Director of Veterinary Sciences, the Center for a Humane Economy. So turning over to you, Jim.
Yes, thank you, Debbie, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Colorado Business Roundtable. The initiative has a new name. It used to be called Initiative 91. It was recently given the name Prop 127, so I'll call it Prop 127. So Prop 127 will stop the trophy hunting of mountain lions and bobcats for their heads and pelts, and end the commercial trapping of bobcats for export of their pelts to China. So about 500 lions out of a population of 4,000 adults and about 2,000 bobcats, population unknown, are killed by trophy hunters and trappers each year in Colorado. Trophy hunting is the #1 cause of adult mountain lion mortality. So I'm a veterinarian with a PhD in infectious diseases. I have 40 years of experience as a practitioner, researcher, and faculty at the University of Nebraska. And I've written 2 comprehensive reports, which are available on the Cat Center Trophies website if you want more information on what I'm going to talk about. There's 3 primary reasons why to vote yes on Prop 127. First is mountain lion trophy hunting is inhumane, cruel, non-consumptive, and unsporting. Trophy hunters, about 2,500 per year in Colorado. That's less than 1% of big game hunters in Colorado that generate 0.14% of Parks and Wildlife license revenues. They track, chase, and hound mountain lions and bobcats with packs of up to 8 dogs. They use high-tech GPS radio collars to track the dogs and tree the wildcats. Then you casually go up and kill the corner cats from close range with a gun or a bow. It's essentially a canned hunt that violates the hunting ethic of fair chase. That is, the prey can't escape the hunter. There's many orphan kittens, and nearly half of all the lions killed are adult females. And live trapped bobcats are strangled, drowned, or clubbed to death to avoid damaging their pelt with a gunshot. So I've completed a comprehensive lit review on mountain lion trophy hunting conflicts with people. Literature is clear. Mountain lion trophic hunting, maybe paradoxically, increases conflicts with people, pets, and livestock. When you randomly kill mountain lions, especially adult males, you artificially skew populations, you create social chaos and open the doors for younger animals with less hunting skills who are more likely to get in a conflict. Adult mountain lions are basically the mountain lion police. When they're gone, the juvenile delinquent mountain lions take over. Second, mountain lion trophy hunting does not increase deer elk populations. This has been shown in many studies in many Western states where mountain lions inhabit. Hunting is not needed to control mountain lion numbers because mountain lion populations, like all apex predators, are self-regulating. Their populations match the available prey and habitat space. The practical proof of this is in California, where Governor Ronald Reagan 50 years ago banned mountain lion hunting, which has been in place for the past 50 years. So California, like Colorado, has about 4,000 mountain lions, but it has 6 times more people than Colorado. Yet only about 10 lions are killed each year now due to conflicts with people in California. And the mountain population in California is stable. That is, cuckoos self-regulate their numbers in the absence of trophy hunting. So maybe the biggest reason to protect mountain lions from trophy hunting is economic. So mountain lions are essential to the billion-dollar deer and elk hunting and wildlife watching industries in Colorado. But Colorado has a terrible disease problem with chronic wasting disease in its deer and elk. CWD, which is the acronym for it, is an epidemic, slow onset, uniformly fatal infectious brain disease in deer and elk with no treatment or vaccine that may become zoonotic. It's rampant in Colorado, where it emerged 50 years ago. 42 of 51 herds and 7 deer herds and 70 of 42 elk herds in the state are infected. In fact, Colorado's deer and elk population, according to some models, may collapse in 50 years. I did a comprehensive view of predator cleansing by mountain lions of CWD. This is the idea that apex carnivores will prevent or control infectious diseases and prey by hunting and killing the sickest and most infectious animals. And many sources, including Colorado Parks and Wildlife and CSU research studies, show that lions selectively kill CWD-infected animals, thereby providing the only known way to control or limit CWD. So if you look at a map, basically where you have ecologically functioning, unmolested lion populations, there's little or no CWD. Where lions are absent, there's usually lots of CWD. So to summarize, the reasons to vote yes on Prop 27 are cruelty is not conservation. Voting yes on Prop 127 will allow control of conflict lions but stop the killing of unoffending lions. Trophy hunting worsens human-wildlife conflicts because it destabilizes coexistence between humans, animals, and predators. Mountain lions self-regulate, so it's not necessary. And most importantly, mountain lions are deer and elk hunters' best friend because they create and maintain healthy deer and elk populations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, for being on. With an opposing view, we've got Dan Gates, who is the Executive Director of the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management. So welcome to the call, Dan.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody today and probably give a little bit of a different perspective than my predecessor. There's been a lot of assumptions or assertions, allegations, innuendos, and insinuations that this is a trophy hunting measure. And if you read the ballot measure language itself, the title, It specifically mentions nothing about trophy hunting in the title itself. The title is read as a change to the Colorado Revised Statute concerning a prohibition on the hunting of mountain lions, lynx, and bobcats, and in connection therewith prohibiting the intentional killing, wounding, pursuing, entrapping, or discharging or releasing of a deadly weapon at a mountain lion, lynx, or bobcat, creating 8 exceptions to this provision, including for the protection of human life, property, and livestock, establishing a violation of this prohibition as a Class 1 misdemeanor, and increasing fines and limiting wildlife license privileges for persons convicted of this crime. As you see, there's nothing in the title itself that it mentions trophy hunting. This is a hunting ban. There are no exceptions to the rule for hunting. There are exceptions to the rule for protection of human health and safety, livestock, science-based type stuff, or euthanization for the wildlife. But hunting is not considered in any of those one components. And as my predecessor had illuminated, there was 2,500 mountain lion hunters last year in the state of Colorado with a success rate of 19%. That 19% means that 81% of those individuals last year, for an example, didn't harvest a mountain lion because of the tools that are used and the testing that is mandated by Colorado Parks and Wildlife for an individual to be able to acquire a mountain lion license, then pursue that mountain lion in a variety of different fashions, including hounds, the use of dogs, and with the utilization of GPS and tracking devices, which is common practice when you get into things like we're talking about in today's environment with habitat, public and private land, different hunting areas, a variety of circumstances that fall into the quotas and the management restrictions and guidelines that Colorado Parks and Wildlife has set, since mountain lions have been a big game species over the course of the last 55 years. That being said, 55 years ago, mountain lions in 1965, who used to be a nuisance or a common predator that would be killed at will, were designed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, which was the Colorado Game and Fish Department at that time, and sportsmen, hunters and anglers combined, to make mountain lions a big game species. At that point in time, there was roughly 200 lions on the landscape, and now that population has increased over the course of the last 55 years with regulated hunting to a population of around 4,000, not including kittens or maybe even sub-adults in some circumstances. What we would like to see is people to be able to be educated in the entire process of what is entailed, not just with mountain lions, but all species of wildlife management. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, for an example, is in charge of 961 species of wildlife, 78 game species, which mountain lions and bobcats are 2 of, that they have adequately maintained population densities and harvest objectives over the course of their management. Lynx, as is mentioned in this particular title, lynx are a state and federally protected animal and have not been harvested in Colorado, nor will they be harvested in Colorado because they are threatened and endangered on a state and a federal level. So when you throw something in like that, it misguides and misleads the general public, but it also maybe degrades and erodes the opportunity for the public to take educated, science-based decisions that have been in place for the course of the last 125 years since Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or the game agency of the state, has been managing our wildlife. What we would like people to do is not listen to our opponents, not even necessarily listen to us. Listen to the facts and the data of the scientists that have been managing Colorado's wildlife appropriately over the course of the last 125 years with mountain lion management for the last 55. And so they can do that by going to cpw.state.co.us and get the facts and the data and the statistics from the organization, the agency that Colorado sportsmen and women pay into, but Colorado residents would like to see continue to manage our wildlife appropriately and in perpetuity. With that, I mean, there's not much you can argue about the pros and cons. We would like to make sure that people fully have the access to the reasonable resources that are available to them, as opposed to a tit for tat, punch for punch, finger pointing back and forth. Leave it to the experts to manage Colorado's parks and wildlife. And this is not a way to manage it through ballot box biology.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate you both being on. It's an important issue for all of us to consider and have the facts on, as you said. The last issue that we're covering today with a pro and con is Ordinance 309, which is only Denver only, which is a slaughterhouse ban. And as we have in the past, we're going to start with the pro position first, which is Natalie Fulton with Pro Animal Future. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm representing Pro Animal Future, which is a group of local volunteers. We have around 130 volunteers in Denver, and we all want to see a better future for our city. You may not have known that Denver is home to the largest lamb slaughterhouse in the entire country. If Measure 309 passes, the slaughterhouse in Globeville will be shut down, and rightly so. They've violated federal law for years by ignoring the EPA's Clean Water Act, polluting the Platte River so badly it's unsafe for recreation. Globeville hasn't seen the same economic growth as the rest of Denver, in part because the stench from the slaughterhouse prevents businesses from opening and property values from rising. Slaughterhouses are known to increase violent crime in their surrounding communities. While they pretend to be a local business, Superior Farms is actually a multi-million-dollar corporation headquartered in California. They've received a large amount of funding from out-of-state interest groups to run their campaign, outspending us over 4-1. Animal agriculture in the United States claims to be an economic powerhouse, but they receive billions of dollars in subsidies to keep their businesses afloat. If it weren't for these subsidies taken directly from hardworking taxpayers, animal products would cost 2 to 4 times more than they currently do. Why do other industries have to play by the rules of the free market while animal farmers don't? Superior Farms received $8 million in government contracts in 2022. If they're so important to the economy, why are they receiving money from the government? CSU released a study that claimed this measure will cost taxpayers $861 million, but that's absolutely not true. The study's authors have deep ties to the meat industry, both personally and professionally, and CSU caught fire earlier this year for generating skewed research on animal agriculture while receiving considerable funding from the industry. An economist from CU Denver called the $861 million figure so far beyond reasonable that it's concerning it was even listed, much less reported on. The study fails to account for any of the positive economic benefits from closing the slaughterhouse, like the benefits to the environment and the businesses that could thrive there instead. Even if we took that ridiculous $861 million number, that only represents 0.16% of Colorado's robust economy. It's smaller than the parking garage industry and the candy industry. We're not sure the effect this measure will have on sheep farmers in the rest of the state, but we would like to see them transition to more profitable industries or different types of farming. We work with 2 organizations, Transformation and the Rancher Advocacy Program, that can help them transition. Farmers in the state get all the benefits of the slaughterhouse with none of the costs. They profit while Globeville suffers due to the pollution. The environmental effects of lamb farming are extreme, whether they're local or not. Sheep take up a large amount of land, devour crops, guzzle water, and emit waste. They are not native to North America and harm the native populations like bighorn sheep that evolved together with our land. Of course, we want to talk about the workers, and there's rampant misinformation that 2,000 jobs will be lost. That figure, once again, comes from the unhinged CSU study. In reality, 160 jobs will be lost, but these are not good jobs. We have not been given a straight answer on the annual turnover at the slaughterhouse. Across the industry, turnover exceeds 100% due to the unique psychological distress caused by killing animals. Slaughterhouse workers have high rates of PTSD, depression, and substance abuse. Most people who work there wouldn't be there by the time it closes anyway. We also have a provision in our legislation that will require the city of Denver to prioritize affected employees in their employment assistance program. It's an excellent program, which receives $40 million in funding every year. We're confident they will find better, safer jobs. Superior Farms touts their employee ownership program, but most employees don't last long enough to get those benefits. We've interviewed several people who used to work there, and they only had negative things to say. We have tried to speak with current employees, but it hasn't worked. I believe they've been instructed not to speak with us. The agricultural revolution was 10,000 years ago, and it's time for another one. Whether you're vegetarian, vegan, or eat meat, we can all agree that industrialized animal farming is not the right way to do things. 68% of Americans think the factory farming of animals is one of the most important social issues of our time. There's rampant cruelty in slaughterhouses, and it's inefficient. If we put 100 calories of plants into a cow, we only get 5 back. New technologies and traditional foods present an opportunity for us to evolve toward a system that's better for workers, animals, the environment, and our economy. We hope that this measure sparks the gradual transition away from using animals as resources, starting here at the local level in Denver. And just to briefly touch on fur, we do not see that it will negatively affect the fishing industry because they
Natalie,
already have
you're out of
alternative
time.
materials.
Just to let you know, you're out of town. Just a quick wrap up.
Sure, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your time today. We've got the opposing viewpoint will be represented by Tyler Chafee with Stop the Ban. Tyler, welcome to the call.
Thanks for having us here. Appreciate your interest and work in unscrambling this ballot. There's a lot of issues here to sort through. So the slaughterhouse ban on the ballot in Denver this November unfairly targets a single employee-owned business and forces 160 employees out of a company that they own. You know, we believe that banning a single Denver business with a ballot measure won't improve animal welfare, but it will have devastating consequences for the local economy and is going to increase food prices at a time where we do not need to increase prices. It's wrong for the people in the plant, of course. I mean, thousands of people will lose their jobs if this measure passes all through the chain, whether it's the truckers, the protein producers, food distributors. But we know for a fact that 160 workers at Denver's only slaughterhouse will lose their jobs and benefits. This is an employee-owned company, which means that the profits of the company go into the retirement plans for the people who work there. They have paid time off. They have health care. And they were not consulted or talked with at all. And when I hear the folks at Pro Animal Future talk about all of the support and assistance, which is not guaranteed at all. Just because it's put in the ballot measure does not mean that they're going to get that help. Then that somehow it's going to, heal the fact that they've just uprooted the lives of these families and taken their job away with a ballot measure. Whether it's truckers, distributors, retailers, butchers, restaurant owners, and employees. 80% of Denver slaughterhouse workers are people of color. They work at Denver's only slaughterhouse, and singling out just one business and forcing it to shut down not only is unfair, but it is hard to not see it as targeting a certain group of people who may not have a strong voice to counter a ballot measure like this. And I think when you even talk about animal welfare, I mean, a ban targeting just one local food producer that already treats animals humanely is the wrong way to do it. Denver's only slaughterhouse produces halal certified meat, which is based on the humane treatment throughout the entire life cycle of the animal in accordance with Muslim religious traditions. It's also designed in consultation with world-renowned animal welfare expert Temple Grandin. USDA inspectors are on site at all times and is routinely inspected by other independent animal welfare auditors. And the attacks on CSU, which I'm just hearing recently, are really troubling because Colorado State University is the land grant institution for this state. Yes, they have strong ties to agriculture because this is an agriculture state. And everyone from Temple Grandin to the authors of the study who spent painstakingly, a careful approach to measuring the impacts of this. I think it's difficult to accuse people of being experts in agriculture as being biased towards a particular business. Also, I think the economist from, UCD that she mentions has really no agricultural experience to speak of. I mean, just because an economist says something about the impacts of the measure doesn't mean that that's how it's going to happen. I think the threats to the economy of up to $861 million worth of economic activity and 2,700 jobs, that's all going to be passed on to consumers. And also, I think it's important to know that this is not an environmentally sustainable approach. Most Denverites will continue eating meat, even if local production is banned, which means shipping more of Denver's food supply from further away, which also increases carbon emissions and makes our food supply chain less sustainable. At the end of the day, this group did not do their homework. They didn't check with the community. They didn't talk with global leaders, at least any of the ones that we've been talking to. They didn't talk to the employees of the plant asking if they wanted their job taken away, if they wanted to be part of taking construction jobs or something like that they've mentioned in previous presentations. And so that's why this is the wrong approach for Denver, and it should be rejected wholesale.
Great. Thank you, Tyler. That concludes our pro-con portion for today's call. We've had several comments and questions come in. We knew we had to keep this kind of tight. There's going to be other chances perhaps for you to interact with the folks who are putting forth the measures or who are against the measures. What we'd like to offer in a follow-up email to all attendees is we'll include information from the speakers if they'd like to include the website for more information or particular contact information. We'd be happy to provide that. I know I had folks who had questions in particular about the hunting ban on several different things, ranked choice voting that came in. And I wish we had more time allotted to a Q&A portion. But as you can tell, the ballot is very confusing. I had folks sending a note saying, they were trying to decide what to have for lunch now. Would it be a lamb burger or a salad? It's hunting season. Folks who are concerned about how this might affect them as outdoorsmen looking to take part in hunting season. So lots of questions. The real reason we brought you all together today, and we're recording the call, of course, to send to a broader audience, is we feel that well-informed voters make the best voters. So turning back to the original conversation with Common Sense Institute, we'll make sure you all have a copy of their ballot guide, which includes data and some research on some of these issues in a more in-depth fashion. And we encourage you to reach out to the speakers today with your individual questions, with your follow-up questions, so that you can be an informed voter and perhaps help inform others in your network, whether it's colleagues or friends as well. So with that, this will conclude our call for today. We thank you all for bringing the information to a broader audience, and we look forward to joining you again next time. On behalf of Colorado Business Roundtable, this concludes our call. Thank you.